hugely popular and very well respected writers here. On my left is Manju Kapur, whose book, the particular book we'll be discussing is this one, but she has a series of books, and I know a lot of her fans are in the audience. On my right is Tabish, Khair, two hugely interesting books, How to Fight Islamist Terror from the Missionary Position, and his new one, Jihadi Jain. Again, very kind of, well, we'll get to that in a minute. I won't describe the books too much because they'll be reading little passages also. I'm going to start with a question for both of you. In both your cases, certainly in your new book, Manju, and in your case too, you've been inspired or you've extracted or something has triggered off a real event, or perhaps a series of real events have triggered off or inspired you to write the books. How does this work? Is it difficult to take something like that and then sort of change it, make it your own? Is it difficult? Is it Manju?
I always deny any resemblance to real events. So if you are, so I'm going to say no. But the theme I am dealing with, which is violence within the family, is something that is, you open any Indian newspaper and there it is. For one reason or another, I think we're a very violent country, a very violent race, and we're always killing each other rather brutally. And this is a noble tradition that goes back to the Mahabharata, and that is a tradition I have plugged into for various reasons. And since I'm a writer who's interested in the dynamics between people living together, I did wonder when I read these incidents and so on and so forth, that what would lead, one sibling to kill another. I mean, you have the superficial motives, jealousy, money, greed, property, but not every family that has these issues ends up in murder or death. So this is what I wanted to explore.
Yeah. And it's a very involved and beautifully crafted novel where you start with it and then you end with it, and in the middle is this kind of slow build up to the thing.
Well, Ashok, it took the life out of me to craft this book.
Did it?
Yes.
No, and it shows. It shows that there is a huge amount of thought, forethought, planning, and this kind of slow ratcheting up of the tension.
Yeah.
Tabish, in your case. Also, now your books actually deal with violence. Yeah. They do deal with violence,
very much.
And they are inspired sort of by real events and so on. Yeah. How does that make you feel? How is it?
Now, some time back, I was forced to distinguish between journalism and creative writing. And I said that one of the distinctions is that a journalist has to jump out with his or her pen and write about an event immediately. With creative writing, that's what you have to resist. You wait until it's all settled down in you, at least, and then you deal with it. On the other hand, these last two novels deal with Islamist terror, which is a very topical issue. On the other hand, the way I wrote about it, wrote both the novels, is not by focusing on news items, news headings, but trying to talk about what gets left out, what is there between the lines, the personal elements, the political elements come in inevitably, they're always there. But the political elements are not the driving force, it's the personal elements which are the driving force. The two novels are of course very different from one another. How to Fight Islamist Terror from the Missionary Position is a humorous book about a very serious issue written a few years ago when I thought people were getting far too serious about this. Jihadi Jain is a dramatic book leading to a climax and deals with violence directly. The first one deals with the possibility of violence rather than violence per se. And violence, of course, is inevitable. I mean, one can never ignore violence. Religious violence is just one kind of violence.
Do we South Asians specialize in it?
No.
I mean, no, you don't think?
In our defense, I would say we don't.
Yeah, yeah.
But sometimes we seem to specialize in it because the forms of violence that exist in South Asia are also what I would consider traditional forms of violence that impact on the body.
Out.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
You can be violent with abstract capital, and that won't be seen as violence. Fire your employees. You're just doing your job.
Yeah, yeah. Now, when you do write these books, and as you pointed out, there's huge years of craftsmanship. I mean, leave alone the original inspiration for it, etc. Do people come to you and do they take umbrage, or do they kind of see themselves in it? Is there a sort of universality here? It's
Sure.
a tricky question. I'm putting you on the spot here.
So far, nobody has taken umbrage at my books, thank God. I don't know what I would do if they did. But no, they don't see themselves in it as such. I mean, I am in the business of heavily disguising my tracks. I do not wish to offend people. I don't wish to hurt anybody's
Absolutely.
sensibilities. And so if I do draw from real life, as I think every writer does,
Absolutely.
you know, what inspires you is what you know, what you've experienced. And I try and layer it, just disguise it, put things together. You know, the novelist's trade and craft. So that kind of thing goes into it.
Yeah, and in your case, of course, it's these two girls, and I want to talk about them. You have really captured beautifully the voice of the narrator, who is a girl, a young girl. How do you do that? Is it your own children, or is it sort of just listening, or is it imagination? How do you do that?
I've been asked that question by a couple of people, and a couple of people.
It's amazing. Because I have a young daughter and youngish daughter, and it could be her.
No. I mean, the people who said, "Oh, this is not a novel. This woman must have met you," and you're just pretending. You cannot narrate her story as a report, so you've made it into a novel. I said, "No, I don't know a single woman like that."
Yeah.
But assuming a woman's voice was frightening, I was so afraid of going wrong. On the other hand, fiction is one space where you always enter other areas. That's what makes it fiction. I worked very hard on it. I drew on people I knew, people who became religious, people who became irreligious. I read a bit, of course, inevitably. But finally, I waited until I thought I had the voice. For me, that's very important, the narrative voice.
And how long did that take? I mean, were you ready to go with the novel, but you had to wait for the voice?
I think in this case, it took about a year, which is very short. but because I think I've been thinking about these issues for so long, and I have known women who have reacted to being marginalized in the West. I've known women who have changed their dress code because suddenly they became religious or married into a religious family. So I've seen lots of these things happening. Okay, they haven't been shooting people, but the mentality has been there.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
So I used all that.
Yeah, you used all that. Well, it has really paid off, let me tell you. Manju, in your case, I mean, your novels have this enormous scope. So you really have to be in the brains of so many different people. I mean, you have sort of essentially a poor villager living in a hut in the early days, and then this goes on to the rise and rise of this family and so on, and yet with the tensions. How difficult or easy is it for you to get into these different brains, these different minds?
Well, this novel coincided with my leaving my job. So I thought I could embark on something bigger, more ambitious. I could have, this is my 6th novel, and in the 5 before this have, had women pretty central.
So this is something of a departure here.
Yeah, so, as a writer, you don't want to feel that you can't enter into
Another
world or another head, or you're confined to one gender and you can't do another, and if you do, there's something wrong with you, so on and so forth. So, as I said, I'd left my job. I could do something more ambitious. I had the headspace to do it. And and also I wanted to write from a male point of view.
Yes, it's interesting, in each of your cases you've switched. There's a male writing from a female point of view and a female writing from a male.
For me, it was, it was a challenge. It was a kind of artistic challenge. Can I do this authentically? And I had immense anxiety around it. I said, particularly because one is a violent guy, so it's not only a guy, but he's a murderer.
Yes, a monster.
Yeah, he's a monster, and yet I have to enter his head and make him, I mean, be empathetic, make him,
somehow
yeah,
lovable.
otherwise, you know, why would you read a black and white book?
Exactly.
You know, for that you go to the newspapers, you don't have to pick up a novel.
Yeah.
So these were and then also the village section. Do I really know what it's like to be a village?
This is what I really wanted.
Do I
Do you
really
know? Yeah.
I thought that for 6 years. Do I really know?
No.
I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, I told myself, no villager is going to read this. So
You're safe.
but still, that was not enough consolation. I wanted to get it right. And on the way to getting it right, I kept making the village sections shorter and shorter, shorter and shorter. Okay, there's not that much that can go wrong if it's short. So it was, I researched all of this. My village notebooks are this high.
Really?
Yes, the pictures are that.
Did you go and live with poor people? I mean, that would have been quite difficult to do anyway, wouldn't it? How does one do it?
Yeah,
You can't
a
knock on the
friend
door
of
a
mine
hut.
who's sitting here who facilitated the whole thing
Really,
said,
really?
don't go and live there, you'll find the toilets very difficult.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, how do you do it physically? You know?
She said, you can't do it physically, she assured me.
Yeah.
So I said, I want to live there, I want to really get into it. She said, you spend morning to night there, you will not be able to live there.
And the other thing is that if you just knock on the door, or if you say, I'm going to visit, they'll clean up the place for you. So again,
No, villages are clean.
Are they clean?
They are clean.
Yeah.
They're way cleaner than cities, way cleaner. I mean, in all the villages I saw, there was no dirt, there was no trash, not the kind of stuff we associate with poor areas of cities. So that was kind of a revelation that they are clean. And okay, they don't have toilets, but they have the fields, as I was told.
I can just imagine you going out into the fields in the middle of the night.
So,
Tabish, in your case, here again, much of the early part of the book is set in two very closed small flats in London, you know. And again, very interesting for me because, you know, it just puts you into a small Muslim household. Forgive me, I should have asked you this. Are you Muslim yourself?
I come from a Muslim family.
From a Muslim, yeah. So it was like very interesting for us to see, you know, the dynamics of a small emigre Muslim family in London, you know. How certain traditions are kept up and others are thrown out of the window, you know. And the two girls coming from essentially quite different Muslim, similar but very different.
Exactly.
In one case, there's a single mother with a daughter, and interestingly, the single mother is much more liberal, and she's horrified when her daughter Amina goes into her robes.
Exactly. Again, I mean, it was important for me to have two very different kinds of Muslims for various reasons. For instance, again, that might be one of the ways in which a novel differs from a news report. The various reports that one keeps on hearing about girls being brainwashed, the word brainwashed, I found that difficult to use because that reduces their agency.
Yes,
if I had used only one kind of Muslim, that would have been the interpretation.
Yes.
But if you have two very different kinds of Muslims, and some of these girls come from very different backgrounds.
Exactly, and that's the particular genius of your book, that we do get that very cross-section of different types of Muslims.
Exactly. So that was very conscious. I needed two. If I hadn't been able to construct these two different characters, I would not have published the novel.
Have you come to be known or accepted as a sort of a Muslim spokesman, a liberal Muslim spokesman? Do people?
I have strongly resisted that. Sometimes at my own cost.
Yes.
In terms of visibility. I have resisted that because I don't want to be either a spokesman for Muslims. I don't want to be a good Muslim or a bad Muslim. Okay. Unfortunately, there's this construct where in some spaces you have this notion of the good Muslim and bad Muslim in, say, some parts of the so-called West. And then among religious Muslims, again, you have this concept of the good Muslim and the bad Muslim, but these are totally different. The good Muslim here is the bad Muslim there, and the bad Muslim there, the good Muslim here. So if you start speaking to only one of these sections, you lose out the other crowd altogether. And I'm not going to let that happen if I can help it. I want to speak to everyone. I want to speak to Muslims and non-Muslims, whoever is willing to listen to me. and which is why I've resisted it.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And it's a hugely complex concept, this concept of Islamic religion, etc., as you quite rightly point out. You know, so many different interpretations. Well, the other joy of both your books, the ones I've read anyway, is this sense of place that you both have. In your case, it's because it's a vast book, vast in scope, but you know, you set it in Jaipur there, you know, and then in the village, you know, there is always a sense of place. Is that difficult to achieve as a writer? Do you have to go and live in these places, or do you,
No,
not necessarily in the hut, but you know, in general?
No, it's both. I have to go to these places. I have to research them. This book is set in Rajasthan. It has Jaipur, Ajmer, and the villages. And see, when I'm writing it, it's not as though I go from the outside in. I go from the inside out. And the first thing I want is to get a story. And once I've got the story, this is very pedestrian,
the footwork.
way of working.
Yeah.
Once I have the story, then I'll say, okay, this happens here, go and see it. This happens here, go and see it. Because in my first novel, I said, let me research all the places. I researched all the places and I threw all that research out.
So you're doing the other way around.
So now I do it the other way around, but I do go to the places. I just feel I'm dreadfully unimaginative. I have to see the place.
No, you're being actually very thorough. How long, as one writer to another, how long did all this take?
Almost 6 years. It just took forever. I just felt, is this novel ever going to be over? Is it, you know, will it ever see the light of day? Why did I leave my comfort zone? I'm never ever going to do that again. Every other novel is going to be set in Delhi. So
I hope, for our sake, that's not true. I hope that you will continue in that way. In your case, Tabish, you know, one of the real joys of particularly this book, the funny, so-called funny one, although it's also very serious, is Denmark. Now, you actually live in Denmark.
I do, yeah.
And for us, I mean, I have never been so far north anywhere. You know, it's a delight to read. You know, do you like the Danish? Or, I mean, you are nasty to them in the nicest possible way, shall we say?
I'm nasty to everyone in the nicest possible way.
Really,
But I think that's my job as a writer.
As a writer, I couldn't agree more.
Oh, nice to everyone in a nasty way.
Yeah.
So, no, I do like Danes. I have lots of Danish friends. But of course, sometimes one gets provoked living in a society that has a lot working for it, but also seems to be very smug about everything that's working for it.
Yes.
And this novel pokes fun of those elements, along with, of course, other elements. So,
and this kind of Protestant ethos that Denmark has.
That Max Weberian Protestant capitalist thinking.
What is that lovely phrase you used in one of them where was it gardening has taken the place of religion, or walking, you know, walking on a Sundays?
But that happens. I realized that a long time back. I've been in Denmark for about 18 years now. It took me about 14, 15 years before I could set a novel in Denmark. Okay.
Really?
It was. All my other novels have been set in India. Okay.
But why is that? Is it a sort of holy cow that you didn't want to?
I needed to absorb the culture more. India is. I am India. India is me. Okay. So I can write about so many aspects of India. I've grown up. Okay, but this needed time. But quite early on, this is just a very short anecdote. When I started teaching in a university there, I would have a class and we would talk about some religious text, Milton's Paradise Lost or something. And the class would be quite hostile to the idea of religion. Most of them would see themselves as irreligious and so on and so forth. And then I would ask them, what do you do on Sundays when you visit your parents? And almost half the class would say, we go out for walks in nature. And I say, in the 19th century, that's what happened with Protestantism. Instead of going to church, people started going out for walks in nature, because nature was an expression of God. Okay? So you're not as irreligious as you think you are.
Yeah. I must say, when I was young and at school, and I went to somebody's house for the Sunday, when they suggested a walk after lunch, my heart sank. But we had to dutifully go and do it. Yeah. The other thing I really like about both your books is, Manju, in your case, the authorial voice creeps in here and there, and it's lovely. There's a section, which if my eyesight is good enough, I just wanted to, So what if Bear with me. So what if witnesses run into hundreds, you say? In India, that meant nothing. It had meant nothing when a train was stopped and passengers set on fire in Godhra. It had meant nothing when a family was trapped and burnt inside Best Bakery in Gujarat before a mob of 500, not one of whom had yet been brought to justice. It meant nothing when thousands of innocent Sikhs were killed after Indira Gandhi's assassination. Again, not one brought to justice. Witnesses turn hostile. Evidence vanishes. Years pass and nothing is proved. I mean, beautiful. You know, the sentiments there, there's a whole novel in that throwaway paragraph, you know? Is this part of it? Because in writing school, we're always told, never let the authorial voice come in. Do you disagree with that? I mean, you teach. What do you teach us? You know, is that?
I don't teach them writing.
You don't teach them writing?
No,
yeah,
no.
Yeah. But I find it poignant and very beautiful that these sort of voices come in here and there.
Well, these are issues I feel strongly
about.
I feel strongly about. And, you know, I don't wish them to be presented in such a way that it overshadows the narrative, but I think it's important to say them. And so I say them. I didn't know you're not supposed to let your narrative work.
Well, this is what I've
I
always
didn't
been
know
told.
that.
And I do it all the time. I'm accused of it. So.
I thought I was doing just fine.
No, and you were, because trust me, you know. in your case, it's not so much the authorial voice as that fabulous throwaway line. You know, the thing about the Protestants going for a walk instead of, you know, and those actually make your books kind of not only very funny, but actually very deep, because if you read it too fast, you miss those little gems that are planted cunningly here and there.
All the nastiness.
All the nastiness. All that. But we all love nasty, don't we? We all love it. That's what we read books for. The nasty violence. I'll never forget in your one, where the husband beats the wife with a shoe for, you know, there was some trivial matter which had nothing to do with her. And I thought, oh my God, you know, does this really happen? And
Not so trivial.
Yeah, not so trivial. No,
the
not
son
so trivial.
was being sent away.
Yes, but why was she blamed for that? It was trivial in the real greater scheme of things.
She was being blamed for speaking.
Yeah, for speaking.
For speaking,
Which is heartbreaking.
Yeah,
Heartbreaking.
yeah.
You know, yes, for protesting, for saying, no, he must stay. Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's details like this that were somewhat, you know, negative or whatever.
Was that based on a real incident?
Yeah. So,
It was,
you know,
really?
so I asked people who'd lived with villagers, I said, you know, and the research I did, yes, this is totally common. It happens all the time.
Really?
You do not, if you're in a subservient hierarchical order, you don't speak, you don't voice an opinion. These are jats, remember?
Yes. I mean, to me that, would you explain? Because to me that doesn't mean so much.
No, I'm not going to explain, because if there's any jat in
the audience
the
will explain. The audience will understand.
I looked nervously at the audience when I said these are jats.
Yeah.
So,
maybe it's time now to get a little snippet of reading from either of you. Tabish, would you like to head off?
I was very confused. Ashok asked me to read for 4 or 5 minutes, and this is a novel that does build up towards a climax, which means that if I read sections that reveal what's happening to you, you might not buy copies.
Please buy the copy.
So I'm actually going to read a very short extract, probably just 2 minutes or so, from around the middle of the novel, when the narrator, Jamila, has been in Syria, Iraq for some time and is starting to doubt some of her earlier convictions that she had when she left home in England. And in this section, this is all narrated by Jamila to an author like me, okay? So she's addressing someone else. In this section, she talks about how when they had run away and all the other women with her in this kind of abandoned orphanage being run by ISIS in the middle of nowhere, how most of them had come there to fight what the Americans would call the good fight. Okay? Many of them, like me, were fighting the good fight. But you know, when a good fight becomes evil, I realized this much later. You can write this down. I don't think all your brilliant pontificating philosophers who think of goodness and evil as concepts but have never stared either in the face, I don't think any of your philosophers and editors can come up with a better definition of evil. Evil, I am certain now, arises whenever a person believes that only what he considers purely good has the right to exist. I have thought about it. Why did Allah have to create shaitan, or God have to create Satan? Why create evil? We were told then, as I was told at home, that it was to test humanity. But why test humanity if you are all powerful and purely good? Why not just drench humanity in pure goodness, as if in your divine rays? The answer, don't laugh at me, that I have now is this: evil is a precondition to goodness. Goodness reveals itself only in its capacity to tolerate the pettiness and dullness of evil. Goodness has to live with the possibility of evil, not eradicate it. As long as it does so, the evil that confronts goodness stays petty, dull, limited, essentially unimportant. But when goodness wants to become pure and alone, that is when it turns evil, truly evil. Not the grubby evil that it has to tolerate in order to be goodness, but evil itself.
This is one of the beauties of your book, Tabish, that you get these very, very serious passages in the middle of all the mayhem and the lightness and so on. I mean, is it difficult for you to tackle these subjects, these kind of almost taboo subjects?
Not really, because these are usually subjects that concern me deeply. I mean, I have to work for a livelihood. I teach in a university. I have 3 kids. That's 3 livelihoods again, 3 jobs.
Yes.
So I have very little time to write. When I write a novel, it has to be something I know will drive me, so I can get back to it again and again when I have time. Okay.
Yeah.
So in that sense, once I get into a story and I have written the first 40 pages, I know whether I'm going to finish it or not.
Yeah. Manju, in your case, I mean, you too deal with, I mean, there may not necessarily be taboo, but there are subjects that nobody talks about. This violence, domestic violence, the shoe, all this kind of stuff that it just horrifies us, and then we think, why are we horrified? We all personally know of events like this, you know? So is that difficult? Does it take a lot out of you to write? I mean, that scene took a lot out of me, just read it, you know?
Yes, it is painful. It is painful. I find it hard to write such things. I mean, for example, I don't like suspense. I don't like violence. I don't watch movies because you can't fast forward to the end. I read books because you can do exactly that. So, for example, when I was writing Brothers, you know right from page 1 what happens. There's no suspense in it.
Yes, absolutely.
So the suspense really lies in why it happens or how it happens, not in what happens. So in these kind of scenes, I tend to keep them short. I feel it's necessary. I only do them when I feel it's absolutely integral to the book. And well.
Does it give you pain when you reread, or do you not? Do you just leave it?
Leave it? I have done this 100 times. So by the end of it, you're a bit, you know, like all the times I was doing it, and I would say, oh, now I'm coming to the end, because you can see all the markers. There's the cement incident, there's this incident, there's that incident, I'm coming to the end. And I would get tense. But I guess that's good, you know, if your own writing doesn't evoke feeling from you, how's it going to
affect readers?
Readers, you know. They have to be emotionally involved. It's not an intellectual exercise. I felt, you know, I do a lot of research for my books, but then I always take a great deal of it out, because I feel if readers want to have a treatise of, you know, the caste system in India or how you rise in politics. They'll go and read a book that's far better informed than anything I can offer them. Or for example, when I wrote Difficult Daughters and I did reams of research, I thought, you know, if anybody really wants to read about partition, they won't read this. It's just for me because I found it so interesting and then I take it all out. So, so I think the emotional component of a novel is really important.
Really important.
Yeah. From that is what pushes the pages forward. That's what makes the reader go on. That is essential. So sometimes I feel it's, you know, I read bad translations or for example, when I was writing this, I read a lot of partition literature, very badly translated. But it had a rawness and an intensity and you know, that kind of thing that just kept you on at it.
Slightly more, not light-hearted, but in a different area, less emotional topic is this. In both your cases, it's a question of this clash of East versus West. Yours overtly so, even in yours, because as the family moves from their rural background, they are getting more westernized and this clash of the different lifestyles. Is that, first of all, is that difficult to handle?
May I take that?
Yes.
Of course.
It is and it isn't. First of all, I don't really want it to be an East-West clash per se, okay, or only, okay, which is why in all my novels, when these two where I deal with it, I also show internal differences. I might not highlight them within the West and within immigrant cultures, within Muslim cultures.
World,
for me, that's very important because otherwise we end up subscribing to some kind of what I would consider fundamentalist definition of identities. This is the West, this is Muslims, and I definitely don't want to do that. On the other hand, some conflicts are experienced at these generic levels and I have to tackle them too. So I try to maintain a balance, and again, I mean, one of the reasons why I do these things through novels, I write studies too, but I prefer doing them through novels, is the nature of the stories. We always told that we think in numbers, ideas, blah, 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 and all that came later. The earliest mode for human beings to think has been stories, okay? All religions have known that. And it's also the most complex of modes because a story does not give you just a moral or just a meaning. A story should, a good story should make you examine things, issues, contemplate matters, okay? Which is why these things can be done much better in a novel than perhaps in a study about immigrants in Denmark or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We're going to run out of time. Manju, can we have a reading from your book?
I haven't answered the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. So please do.
No, because I thought a lot about it. It's not, I mean, there are a lot of divisions in this novel. They're not East versus West.
No, it's more.
But they're rural versus urban. They are, you know, traditional joint family, uneducated Parda women versus women who in the cities who've gone to, who've been educated and who therefore think differently. So really, you know, all the kinds of differences and conflicts in the book arise from, say, exposure to opportunities or being deprived of them. I mean, I didn't really see it as
an East-West thing.
No, but more modern, traditional, urban, rural, caste-based, non-caste, that kind of thing.
Yes.
And that's actually true of India. I mean, it's so riven with these kind of things.
Yes. It's a very rich book as a result because there are all these different tennis matches being played, so to speak, you know?
Yeah.
Well, please, if we could have a reading.
Okay. Whenever I do a reading, you know, because this book is 120,000 words, and when I do a reading, I feel, how can anybody get anything from my book unless they read all 120,000 words? So it's a bit of a problem for me to read anything because I feel you won't be able to get it. So what I do is, there's 6 snippets, and if I exceed the time, I'll just stop. So, okay. I'll start at the beginning. The beginning gave me immense trouble. It was years before I came across this sentence. And then I said, at last I think I've got it. So, for Tapti Gaina, wife of the newest prisoner in the Jaipur Central Jail, what time of day is best. It had to be morning, the brief flickering seconds that fell between her half-open eyes and the cruelty of full consciousness. Yesterday, she had gone to Fateh Tibba during visiting hours, only to be turned away. Mangal did not wish to see anyone. She stood before the prison walls, absorbing the implications. He had never once not wanted to see her. Since their marriage, she had been used to his face lighting up when she entered the room, to the softening of his features when he looked at her, even when angry. This rejection was what divorce must feel like. Her eyes opened to the sudden brightness of day. Soon her mother would appear with a cup of tea, her face wearing the tight, resigned look that was now permanent to them all. Then nag, nag, nag. Why wasn't she up? Taking leave did not mean spending days in bed. It was important for the girls to see their mother functional. Her poor, chastened daughters, who would be dogged by the consequences of their parents' action all their lives. Mridula didn't want to go to college. Everybody kept gawking, asking questions. Why couldn't they emigrate to Australia? Don't talk nonsense, Mridu, said her mother. But why? Why was it nonsense? Nothing lasts forever. This time next year, nobody will even remember. Her daughters stared at her. Everything else might be forgotten, but not this. But the day had to come when their family drama would cease to be of such interest. Till then, she couldn't let Mridu know how much she identified with her. When she returned to her office, it would be to the greedy curiosity of her colleagues, to questions disguised as concern. What was the inside story? There must have been some jealousy, some secret animosity, some depression at the very least. And they would go on talking, assuming her interest in how they felt when they received the news. So surprised, so astonished, so disbelieving, but TV cannot lie. Tapti waits till her daughters come home, till lunch is served, then leaves the house. There is no point going anywhere when her heart is with him in the ICU. She asks her driver to drive down to Hospital Road. As she alights from her car, she can make out the many party workers loitering aimlessly in scattered groups. Young men there to be noticed, to be made much of, to pass the time. This is her third attempt to see him. She uses a different entrance to arrive at a similar situation. Visitor pass demands the guard at the foot of the stairs. CM Saab, I want to see CM Saab. I am family. Arey madam, that is what everybody says. I am real family, real. His brothers. Her voice falters and the guard's suspicions increase. Only one visitor allowed with pass. Standing to one side, she sends another hopeless text to his wife, his children. I'm waiting downstairs. Is it possible to send me an entry pass? Okay, 5 minutes are up, so finish.
You say something in one of your books, talking about immigrants who go. You say it's either different or difficult for the second generation because they have a vested interest. Would you care to explain that? It's quite an interesting concept.
In different ways, these two novels deal with that. Before I answer the question, I'll just make a short announcement. This novel, Jihadi Jain, it's available outside India as just another Jihadi Jain. So don't order both of them, they're the same novel, okay? And I think so-called second generation or children of immigrants, I find that term difficult second generation immigrant, when is it going to stop? No? Third generation, fourth generation, you are either an immigrant or you're not an immigrant. And I think that's part of the problem, that we don't even have a term that's used so commonly. So these second generation kids, they don't see themselves just as immigrants, but they are seen as immigrants all the time, which can put different kinds of pressure on them. Some of them can try to be even more Danish or English than the Danes are the English. Some of them can react and try to be even more Hindu or Muslim than their parents, and so on and so forth. And I think that's part of what I mean, that the pressure on the second generation tends to be more complex and greater. Their parents very often come with, again, if you're growing up, especially in the West, very often your experience of your own social and cultural complex is rather narrow. Okay? And there, in the case of Islam, for instance, it's very easy to look for some kind of differential identity, and then everyone, people in the West, Westerners as well as Muslims, they define your Muslimhood in terms of one book, and increasingly one reading of that one book.
Yes, just
Okay.
one reading, yeah. In your case, Manju, I mean, you talk about this shift from rural to city. I mean, does that put pressure on kids? I mean, in your research and so on, did you find that, I mean, how much of the country do you retain in you once you've moved to the city? Do you remain a country boy at heart, or do you just keep it for when you go on holidays?
Well, it becomes, you know, for example, the guy who came, Mangal, those values that he grew up are there inside him, and that's what he judges actions by. But those values are not sustainable in his position. But he can't, I mean, he doesn't know what to replace them with. So he's in this, you know, this causes a lot of strain, particularly in these men's relationship to women. How do you relate to women? And I think this is, you know, a situation that's, you know, not confined to my novel.
Universal,
unfortunately.
Yes, unfortunately, yeah.
How do you relate to women if you're not used to seeing them as equal, as individual, as forget equal, as even as individual, as having, you know, being respect worthy in some ways, and yet they're out there in the world, you know, they are getting that attention and that respect. But how do you negotiate? How do you negotiate that? And when you can't, then there's a great deal of dissonance and a great deal of, you know, as I show, conflict and tension, and this unresolved, because you can't even voice these things, you know, because then you're seen as totally regressive and, you know, backward, and you know enough to know that. But you don't,
it doesn't help the problem.
No, it doesn't help the problem. It doesn't help it at all. So, you know, I mean,
tough one,
this is seen as one of the reasons. I mean, I don't want to do pop psychology, but, you know, the incidence of violence against women that seems to be on the increase in India. I mean,
South Asia, let's not keep it.
Oh, really?
South Asia, oh yes, I think.
Oh, okay. So perhaps, you know, changing ways of, you know, the kind of tension.
Shift,
that shift. Changing ways of relating to women, I mean, between women and men. This is seen as, you know, an uneasy divide that, you know, you need help in negotiating, I think.
It's a huge topic which we will never solve here.
So
we're running out of time. Can we have some questions? Is there a microphone? There's one here. Sorry to cut you off. But, but there's lots of people here who want their pound of flesh from either of you.
I am Bhanumati Mishra from Banaras Hindu University, Varanasi. Both your books are very delightful. I would like to know, I have 3 kids like Tabish, you have, and I am an academic. How do you manage your time? And what are your writing schedules? Do you have a room of your own, metaphorically, I mean?
Thank God I have a room of my own, both physically and metaphorically. And I came to writing late. I was almost 50 before my first book was published. And the reason was that I had a job, I had children, there was just no time. Now my children are all grown up, I've chucked my job. So at this advanced stage, I have the room, I have the time, I have the headspace. And for me, and I think this is true of, of women in general, you will find, not always, but you will find, famously in the 19th century, for example, women either unencumbered by family or coming to writing late, or whatever it was they did.
When did Jane Austen begin to write?
Unencumbered by family.
Okay. Because you are the Jane Austen of India.
I think I don't have a room of my own either.
You don't?
No. And I don't write at home unless the kids and my wife, they're on vacation or somewhere. Because some people say you can sit down and write for 2 hours every morning, which is true. One never writes more than 2 hours. Okay, the actual writing is 2 hours.
Absolutely. One never does.
Exactly. But that 2 hour can take 4 hours to come. So I get up early at 6, but I start trying to write, and by the time I start writing, it's 8, and my kids are up, and hi, Papa, breakfast. and then I have only 2 options. Either I get irritated at them, or I get irritated at my writing. I don't want to face that, so I never write at home. I write when I have periods when I can write, such as this festival, where I've been staying in my hotel until 12 and writing.
Oh, that's what you've been doing.
Yeah, that's why you didn't come.
Questions? Oh, there's somebody there.
So my question is to Tabish sir. Sir, in your book, Jihadi Jane, you talk about 2 Muslim girls joining ISIS.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question.
Oh, but we can't hear you so well. Just
Hello. Sir, in your book, Jihadi Jane, you talk about Muslim girls joining ISIS. So what are your views on jihad? Matlab it's a most misunderstanding concept. Okay. So what are your views on jihad, and how should every one of us view what is jihad?
Okay.
What are your views on jihad?
I'll give you an anecdote. The first time I heard the word jihad, I became conscious of the word jihad. I must have heard it earlier. Was when I was 12 or 13, and an elderly relative from my ancestral village visited me, and I'd just passed an exam and I'd done fairly well, and my father told him that, and he said, beta, jihad karo, jihad karte raho, jihad karte raho. Basically meant, he said, son, keep on waging your jihad. He did not mean chopping off people's head or converting them to Islam. He meant doing your job as a student, doing that job as well as possible. So there is that meaning
Fulfilling
to jihad too, okay? Unfortunately, that's not what a lot of fundamentalist Muslims focus on, okay? So again, it's a word, and a word can be given different meanings. A word is always being pulled in different directions. Unfortunately, Muslims like me have allowed that word to be pulled too far in another direction. Hopefully, we'll be able to pull it back.
Yeah, ma'am, good morning. This question is for Manju Kapur, ma'am. I just want to ask you one thing. I have read your Difficult Daughters, where it deals with women empowerment, importance of education, family dynamics, man-woman relationships, everything. And you have given the title Difficult Daughters, and which is branded as a feminist novel. But this recent novel is also about brothers. Is this march towards gender sensitization, or you want to take a shift to masculinity?
Oh my goodness. You know, I didn't even call my novel Difficult Daughters. It was the publisher. I had called it Partitions. The publisher said, that's such an academic title. Nobody's going to look at your book. So, I mean, all I'm saying is, first of all, I do consider myself a feminist in the sense that I think it's important that women be granted, you know, fundamental rights and liberties and respect and so on and so forth. As for the titles of my novels, unfortunately, marketing plays a large role in this, and the publisher says this is not going to sell, that is not going to sell, and as a first-time author, or even as a sixth-time author, you want your books to be read, that's why you're writing them, and you know nothing about market forces, that's why you're a writer, and so you tend to say, I mean,
just give in.
Yeah, just say, okay, you know. I mean, I know there are writers, I mean, I stand for what my books say, but the title itself, some I feel strongly about, some I don't. So we reach a compromise. So I hope that answers your question.
This is addressed to both. How important is the craft or the narrative in deciding the political position of your fiction?
I think if you're writing a novel, the craft is absolutely essential. Otherwise, you would not be choosing this form. You'd be writing an essay, you'd be doing something else. So I feel very strongly about craft. I feel it's important to say what you're saying, but in the best way you can say it. And that demands discipline, working at it, polishing at it, you know, going on and on and on. Like, I mean, I don't know how many times I've written this book. And each time I've written it, I'm hoping to hone my craft. Not to say something different, not even to say something more, but to say it in the best possible way, the most economical, the most effective. So craft is supremely important.
I would agree. Craft, art, thought, all of them have to merge. But if you haven't worked on the craft, you'll never be able to deal with the art or the thought.
Yeah.
And one of the things you do in a novel in particular is engage with language. Language comes with own layers and layers of meaning and contention.
Yeah.
And craft also enables you to deal with that. You cannot just use a word without thinking of what it might mean to someone else. Again, I keep on pointing this out to people. It's perfectly easy to lie with facts. Okay? Everyone lies with facts. You twist facts, you can even use facts correctly and lie with them. Politicians do it all the time. So, but you cannot lie with fiction. For fiction to work, it has to be true. You have to be true to yourself, to your craft, to your character, and to your reader. When all these different truths combine, your fiction works.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tarun Sharma, and my question is to ma'am. Ma'am, earlier you said that in the villages, women are being beaten by their men or by their husband.
Oh dear.
And ma'am, in our country, as I can say clearly, Pitra Satta is something that is being perceived in male mind that gives a power, thinking power over a women in our country. But don't you think that in nowadays, male gender is more supportive of women empowerment?
See, I don't mean to draw black and white, all men beat their wives and all men are patriarchal. I mean, men are enormously supportive too. And I hope I've shown that in some books of mine or whatever. But nevertheless, it is true. I mean, you have to look at honor killings, you have to look, I mean, women are vulnerable. Women are vulnerable, they don't have economic power, they're not as educated, they're not as out in the world. And because they're vulnerable, those vulnerabilities or those weaknesses tend to be exploited. You know, it's easy to beat your wife if everybody else around you is also doing the same thing. It's easier for the wife to accept it if she doesn't see any alternative. This doesn't mean to say, you know, that it's universal or that it always happens, but these are particular situations.
Hello, good morning. Myself, Mrs. Sultana. My question is from Mr. Tabish. I just want to know that the new generation of Muslim community, especially girls, they are living there, they are taken birth and brought up there, but still they are not very much adjusted there. They don't want to marry with the Indian guys, Asian guys, rather not Indian and Pakistanis, and their parents are not allowing to marry the European boys. So it's a problem, you know, it's a biggest problem for the new generation they are facing. So what do you opine? What is their future there regarding the family and all?
Yeah.
So
I think first of all, we are talking of so-called second generation immigrants, basically, aren't we? And boys and girls, especially girls, brought up in families that tend to come from what would be called traditional culture. One of the best ways to maintain tradition, so-called tradition, as a fixed entity, is by controlling women. So they tend to resist allowing the girls in particular, and sometimes the boys, to marry outside their own circumference. This is not confined to Muslims. I mean, lots of other communities do something similar, also across religious grounds, and this will only change with time. It cannot just change like that. It changes with also with the development of independent economic means. One of the ways in which young people can be on their own is by becoming economically independent. As girls and boys become economically independent earlier, they might be able to decide more freely. I mean, what happens in some of these conservative communities is that actually, especially girls, are married off as soon as they can be. 21, bang, marry her. Okay, so those are the answers. There's not just one answer. It is a problem. It's not a problem that can be wished away. It will change only when certain structures of economic and social existence change, both at the family level and at the social level. Yeah.
One final question.
My question is to you, ma'am, that you wrote on rural side of a woman. Though you have been given exposure to modern life, what made you write about, what was your motto behind there? Or was there any inspiration?
First of all, I'm not a believer in inspiration. I've never had inspiration. I'm just doing it all, not all day, 2 hours, but I do it or try and do it every day. Why did I write about village? Well, actually, you know, maybe because I've been an academic for much of my professional life, but I tend to see people in contexts. And contexts include the generation previous. So in order to explain attitudes, I think it's important to go back to their parents, to look at so the village is not, it is an important part, it's not the main part, but I wanted to show two generations of brothers, the fathers and the sons, to see how forces of modernity or urbanization have come to, you know, to divide them in a way so that they are very different, you know, they play out their lives in very different manners. That's why I went to the village. And I don't know, I just like villages. So.
One final question.
Good afternoon. My question is to Mr. Tabish Khair in reference to your book Jihadi Jain. So I wanted to know that in view of the fact that people from all across the religions have joined and supported the ISIS ideology, why did you choose 2 Muslim girls to depict this entire issue that has been going on?
Yeah. Interesting question. I mean, that's been put to me. Why not 2 Muslim boys, for instance? And the reason is that I'm not interested in boys who join the jihad. I see them as basically petty criminals, bullies, or idiots. Okay, so to be honest, okay. But girls, that becomes another matter because it's such a complex situation. They lose out on so much, especially if they've grown up in England. They still choose to do that. What is that drives them? For me, that's a very interesting, fascinating question. For men, yes, it gets them to act like bullies. It gives them a gun. It gets them to do whatever they want to do to women, okay? I'm not interested in that story at all, okay?
Ladies and gentlemen, Manju Kapur and Tabish Khair. They'll both be signing their books outside, so you can ask a few more questions there. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for that extremely, it was just a very insightful session. Thank you.
My line is that today it's not the country with the bigger army that wins, it's a country with the bigger, better story that wins.
Oh, it's been a wonderful teamwork. I think it's superbly organized, and I don't have any criticism.
Nobody should have the right to say, because I believe something, you aren't allowed to say or do something. And we know that at this festival, the free speech issue has been very prominent.
If JLF is going on, you should not sit idle at your home. You should come here. You will get, definitely you will get something from here.
Yeah. I'll answer. Yes. I don't believe in reservation. If I have the quality,
that's even better.
I don't believe in reservations. I don't believe in casteism. I don't believe in color. If I have the ability to touch the seventh sky, I will do it.
No.